see the presentation? Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen and you can formally proceed with your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you for that kind introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar where we're going to be talking about risk culture building and the future of risk management from the perspective of what are we doing about people risk and how do we actually mitigate and control people risk. So very often in most organizations, this is what we generally get asked in the risk function. Have you completed your last minute risk assessment? They tend to call in risk management right at the end, just before they go live with a new product or just before they implement a new system. So generally, in organizations, those who don't understand the risks or miscalculate the risks will eventually be exploited by those who understand the risks better. And risk culture arises thus from the repeated behaviors of the employees in an organization. So it's important to now look at addressing this matter of people risk and risk culture. For a long time, we've been looking at systems, we've been looking at processes, we've been looking at procedures. That was the easy part to do. The difficult part is the people side. And my objective today is to give you an indication of what to do on the people risk side. Because over the past decade or so, we've seen that there was a lot of focus on the quantitative models and not much on the behavioral side. And the behavioral side is the side that you actually need to address. You know, every person in the organization should be a risk manager. As I normally say in some of my training courses, you know, what do you do when you cross the street? You look left, right, and left, or right, left, and right, depending on where you live in the world. That being said, you are managing the risk of crossing the street. But where does that come from? And some people told me they were born with it, which was quite interesting. But that comes from your mother taught you when you were 5 years old. And just imagine if every person in the organization looked left, right, and left before they take a decision. If they assess the risks and look at the risk and take that into consideration before they take a decision. My objective this afternoon is to change the way you see and the way you think about risk management and give you some practical knowledge and experience to apply that in your organizations. So why did we get to the problem that we see and that we have at the moment? I think if you can see at the bottom, you know, everybody was just making money and everybody was just saying, see no evil, and see no evil. So many organizations went well beyond their risk appetite, and sometimes they weren't even realizing that they're doing that. If we look at risk culture and the credit crunch that we're busy coming out of, and in some places have come out of, all the research done shows that there's got to be a focus on culture and the courage to say that, you know, we need to look at the value added to the business in the long term. We need to look at how do we embrace risk management fully? How do we look at the people side of risk management? Just some of the key things if we look at risk management and risk culture. Key things that we need to keep in mind are risk awareness. You know, we got to have a common language. If the audit department and the risk department all assess risk, there's got to be a common language. There's got to be a common understanding of what the parameters are to assess risk. We also need to look at the risk appetite. Now, this is an item that we often don't see in organizations. You know, if you walk in and say, what is your risk appetite? There are very few boards of directors that can answer that. The problem we have is without a defined risk appetite, people don't know how much risk they should be taking. and they don't know what are the cutoffs for taking that risk. So it's important to look at that. Obviously, the other things, training and development, communication, those kind of things, that's general risk management stuff. But the bottom line is, people make it happen, and only people make sure that it couldn't happen again. I have never seen any model mitigate risk. Models are great to tell us how much risk we have, but only people can do the controlling. Only people can do the mitigation. So it comes back to how will a person in your organization respond to a situation of risk. And that is why we need to look at, for the future, encouraging or inspire more of the behaviors we want, both the ones we want to encourage, the positive ones, and also the ones we would like to avoid, the negative ones. And that brings us to risk culture. This is the definition of risk culture as we've put it out in the risk culture guidance document issued late in 2012 by the IRM. But why do we need to change? Why do we really need to focus on risk culture and change risk management? We have to rethink it, because a lot of the things we were doing that we called risk management were not working, and they did not work to prevent the crisis that we had. There's a lot of support from top management, but very often it's still just a compliance perspective. They tend to look at, can we tick the boxes? Do we do everything that the laws and regulations want? They are not driving the value. We need to start to look at the value-adding aspects. Risk management must start to bring in, after 10, 12 years of having it as a formal function, we need to look at bringing in a positive return on investment. Risk management department must bring in more money than what it costs to have them. That is quite an interesting concept for a few risk practitioners, but it means that you need to look at what value do you add to the business. For example, the easiest example would be to look at near misses. Are you tracking near misses for fraud, for example? Those kind of things, if you track them and quantify them, that is the value that risk management is adding. Or when losses come down and you're preventing losses, that means there's some value that risk management is adding, and we need to take that and quantify. We also see through a number of organizations that, in a number of organizations, that operational risk is emerging as a key driver for risk management, because it spans across all the other risk disciplines that we've seen. And there are new tools and concepts coming out. It's not just looking in the rearview mirror any longer. I often say that if you report risks once a month, it's probably 28 days too late. Because by the time that information reaches the user who's actually got to use it to make a good business decision, that information is out of date. And then you get some companies looking at quarterly risk reporting. I've even seen some looking at annual risk reporting. The information is of no use to the user by the time it gets to them. So the biggest change is to move from this rear view mirror focused focus and move to a forward-looking perspective. Be more proactive. Look at scenario analysis and look at risk optimization. So that's enough about risk management and the past. Let us just look at how do we go to the future. We need to look at the levels of maturity, and there are 5 different levels of maturity that I normally use. The very low level, there's not much capability in the organization, and as we go up on the levels, you will see that ultimately it's all about building sustainable competitive advantage and having every employee as a risk manager. Now, if you look at these 5 levels, we also need to look at them in terms of 6 different areas of operation within risk management. We need to look at the policies, the processes, the key element for today's talk, people and organizational design. We've got to look at the reporting, management and control, systems, and data. Now the next couple of slides break up the different levels in these 6 different areas. So step 1 for you to look at risk culture in your organization is to actually take stock of what is there at the moment. And the way we do that is to look at these capabilities. Are they in place in your organization or not? You will see at the top it covers policies, processes, people, and organizational design. This is the first 3 of the 6 that I mentioned, and this is the basic capabilities that we see at risk management level 1. So if you have individual risk heroes in your organization, or they're still managed in silos, you're always firefighting, those kind of things under people and organizational design are the indicators that you are still at the very lowest level. There are no clear risk owners, there's no real risk communication, etc. We look at level 1 for the other 3 areas: reporting, management and control, systems and data. Very often you see spreadsheets everywhere. You see reporting is ad hoc. There's not a fixed risk reporting process. Some of it is inconsistent when you look at management control. A lot of things are maybe oversimplified, those kind of things. So that is capabilities at level 1. Now, this presentation will be uploaded, so I'm going through the next couple of slides maybe fairly quickly because we don't need to discuss all of them, but you can use them when you look at the presentation to establish at which level of maturity your organization is. So we've just covered level 2, there's level 3, level 4, and let's just quickly then look at level 5. What does it look like when you are at the ultimate level of risk capabilities in your risk culture building? You have under people in organizational design, if you look at the right-hand side of the presentation, there's individual performance measures fully aligned and they are risk sensitive. Knowledge and skills are upgraded continuously. You need to build the risk management competencies into the competency framework for the organization. You need to add the risk requirements to the job descriptions, those kind of things. And obviously, every employee being a risk manager. So that's what we look at if your capabilities are at level 5. So when you get the presentation afterwards, you can print these slides out and work out and establish at what level of maturity in each of these areas your organization is. So that is a little practical exercise that you can do. I can also make available the spreadsheet. There's an Excel spreadsheet that will make it much easier. So you're welcome to send me an email afterwards and I can provide you with the spreadsheet to make your life easier and you don't have to go and cut and paste all of that. So all these inputs from those 6 different areas should eventually go into a dashboard, and I will not talk about that too much, but it just shows the outcome of this exercise, how you can use that and where you can get different data inputs for that dashboard. So what is still wrong? Very often we do not look at the context of the business goals. I've often walked into organizations and the strategic plan for the organization is locked up in the drawers of the senior management because it's too private and confidential. So if you don't let your staff know what the strategy is and the goals are, they cannot take risk decisions. So the key element is get the strategy and the goals and objectives out down the line. Everybody should know what the goals and objectives are. Compliance activities very often is still the sole focus, and there's a very narrow perception that risk creates thinking that it's driven by fear. It's not that case. We need to look at optimization of risk management a lot more. Frameworks don't engage the whole organization. Very often you find that the risk department is trying to build risk culture on their own. And very often, if you go to the analogy of the banana peel, when people see the banana peel, they call risk management instead of picking it up so nobody can slip it. So we've talked about common language and standards earlier, and we need to look at performance management, and risk is still seen as a cost center. So we need to start to change that perception that risk management is a cost center. We're going to go a little bit deeper into risk culture building and the process of that. Risk culture building, by the definition that I use, is the process of growth and continuous improvement to mitigate, control, and optimize risk. So it's not all about just controlling or just mitigating risk. It's also looking at the opportunity side and optimizing risk management. Mass transformation of the attitude and the behavior can only come from leaders. So it's important to involve your leadership. It is important that the tone at the top is not merely signing the risk policy or approving the risk policy. The tone at the top should be living the risk policy. If we look at risk culture building, I think in a lot of organizations we have done a lot of work. We've actually changed some tasks, we've changed some roles, we've changed the structure. The next thing is to change behavior. That is where it gets a bit more difficult, and ultimately the culture will change. But as you see on the right-hand side, the level of effort goes up. It's much more difficult to change the structure than just adding risk management on somebody's job. It's a lot more difficult to change the behavior, and it's thus a lot more difficult to change the culture. Now, I often ask delegates in conferences this question: does your risk management process motivate or irritate your staff? And that's something that you need to think about in your business, because a lot of what you will do in risk culture building would be, is it motivating your staff or is it irritating them? And that is a key element to keep in mind. So what do we need to look at? Start this again. What do we need to look at when we implement risk culture? We need to look at designating a risk management champion in each of the departments. Now, very often we go out and say, nominate somebody. The minute you ask them, the management of the department, to nominate somebody, you will get the person who is perceived to have no work, or you would get what we call the dead wood. So we need to look at how do we actually identify risk champions. The best way would be to look at asking people in the department who is interested in risk management, who want to learn more about risk management. Then we must make it part of the culture, tearing down the silos. People need to start to talk to each other to make risk culture building successful. Determining all the possible risks of the organization, I've put that in there because generally at that point, if it's an interactive presentation, I would ask that question to the audience. It is impossible to determine all the risks, but what is important is how every single person in the organization will respond to a situation of risk. You can never determine all the risks. Look at appropriate risk transfer, monitor the process, and then a key element is start slowly and build upon the success. Show the value that you add and build upon those successes. So if we look at risk culture building even in more detail, we look at the major cultures of the world. We have honor versus shame culture, which is predominantly in the East. We have guilt versus innocence culture, which is predominantly the West. And we have power versus fear culture, which is more tribal culture related. So in most organizations in the Middle East where we live and work at the moment, in most of organizations you have all three of these cultures in the same business. And how do you actually write a risk management policy or a whistleblowing policy taking into consideration the differences between all those three cultures? We also have all the generations in our businesses. Generally, you have 3, in some businesses up to 4 different generations, and they all come from different backgrounds. They all react differently to different situations of risk. And we need to keep that in mind when we build the risk culture in the organization. You might be working with all these guys, and how do you actually incorporate the differences and the different lines of thinking about risk management into your policies and the procedures. Just for a little bit of interest, what will we remember from the baby boomer generation? I think a few of you, if you are that age, would notice that. If we look at the current generation, what will we remember of the millennials? And then what will we really remember of the cyber generation? So we need to look at this. I often say to IT security people that you can block Facebook in the office now, but the next generation grew up with it. When they come to the office, they're not going to accept that you block Facebook. So very few companies really bother to measure their investments in human capital and the return on those investments. We've seen that back in 2003, some research studies already showed that. And it's important that we look at it as part of risk culture building. By now you've probably realized that one of the first departments that you need to talk to when you want to build a risk culture in your organization is the human resource department. I've written a few blog posts on the role of HR in risk culture building, so we can also make those links available if you want to read more about that afterwards. So let us look at when is it really bad. When is an organization's risk culture not good? If it's always reactive, if there's no proactive mitigation, optimization, and control of risks. Understanding is inconsistent, maybe non-existent. Maybe some people in the organization don't even understand what risk management is about. Performance measures do not motivate the desired risk-aware behaviors, and messengers of bad news are not well received by management. I've heard at a conference last week somebody saying that there is no such thing as bad news, because bad news it has to be turned good news from a risk perspective, so that the right people can take the right decisions at the right time to avoid losses or to at least contain losses. If there's not a good knowledge of documented risk policies and guidelines, if it's dependent on the efforts of a few people and audit and compliance observations are generally ignored. Just on the first point here, most organizations have got some kind of an induction program for their staff. And I've seen very few where risk management and risk awareness is part of the induction program. Very often you will find that it's signing the IT security policies, signing the HR policies, and that's all that's covered. The risk culture and the organization's way of managing risk is very often not covered in an induction course. So if you don't cover risk management and risk culture in the induction course, you are forever playing catch-up. As new people come into the organization, they don't know. So it's important to start with the induction program when you want to build a risk culture in your organization. Some principles, I'm not going to discuss all of these in the essence of time, but it's important to look at risk culture must add value to the decision making. It must add value and provide something useful. That is when you will stop irritating your staff and start motivating your staff in terms of risk management. If we look at the reliability of business operations, this quote is a few years old from the Bank of Japan, but it's still valid. It depends on the expertise and the discipline and the morale of each employee. And then many years ago, Einstein in various ways said that don't do the same thing over and over and expect a different outcome. We also often make things way too complex. We must make risk management simple, and each and every employee in the organization must understand the basic risk management principles and must have the basic risk management skills. Generally, I would say that if you look at Microsoft Office, that's the kind of level of risk skills every person in the organization must have. You cannot work anywhere today if you can't read and respond to email. So in the future, you can't work anywhere if you don't know the basic likelihood and impact of risk assessment, basic risk management, and risk profiling skills would become needed if you want to work anywhere. Even in small organizations, we need to look at risk management. We don't always need a formal department and a formal process, but every single employee must look at risk management and must practice the basics of risk management. Again, there's a methodology that I've developed on people risk mitigation based on these 5 pillars: leadership, actualization, spiritual needs, having the right policies, and having a good competency framework. Again, I will not discuss all of these. You can work through these slides when you download the presentation, but I would just want to highlight a few things here. Human capital will only appreciate in value if they looked after and trained properly. So we need to look at how do we empower people to do risk management. Let us just look at leadership, and I will just highlight 1 or 2 things on each of these slides. The key thing is if you don't re-recruit your best employees, somebody else will take them. I always said that everybody is in the market at the right price. So don't think that your employees that's been there for 20 years would actually just stay there forever. You do need to look at their growth and their opportunities, and a key thing would be to get them involved in risk management. It's exciting and new, and everybody should want to be in risk management. 90% of the leadership is through what you do. So it's important, if you have the support, you have the right tone at the top, it is important for that to go down into the organization. Another thing is also the ethical standard that we need to follow, and I'll say a little bit more about ethics and risk culture later in the presentation. Again, there's something from Einstein, and this is very often how we look at risk management. People see that and they don't do anything about it. They think someone else will do something. And that's what we need to change in our organizational cultures so that we have a better risk management culture. We've talked about this before, that leaders must instigate this. I just want to re-emphasize the point that it comes from the top. Leadership must be involved not only in signing off the policies and agreeing to the procedures, but actually living those. If we look at actualization, this goes back 50 odd years to Maslow. The key things again is looking at honesty and integrity. Here's the hierarchy of needs. It's all about themselves. People really want to work for that self-actualization. And we've known that, but we are trying to get people to do everything that we tell them. We stop them from thinking. So it's important to teach them the skills to think about risk management. People do things only for one reason, because they want to. I always say that you can have the best risk policies and the best procedures. If Johnny gets out of bed at the wrong side, he doesn't care about your risk policies and your risk procedures. If we look at spiritual needs, this is, everybody believes in something, and how you respond to a situation of risk is determined by your ethics, the values, your upbringing, your experience. I always say if you've been through a situation of war, you will respond differently to a situation of war than a person that has never been through it. So these are all important things to keep in mind when we look at people risk litigations. And how do we build this into the company? Most companies subscribe to the 4 core values, but do we actually live them? And do we actually embed them into our staff's way of living? If we look at this movie, in this movie there is a scene where the person is offered the promotion, but he's got to go back and think about it, because part of the promotion is that he must lie and submit false reports to the company and facilitate fraud. And he came back the next day, and this was his reply. So just think, if you can have this kind of ethics in your organization, how well will your people risk management and your risk culture be working? So in the workplace of the future, this was said by the economist in 1993, the competition may not be for customers, but for the hearts and the minds of the employees. Just look at the published fraud numbers and how much of that is internal and committed by employees. This is also a quote from an interesting book on the psychology of Arab management thinking, and a key element I want to highlight from this is many switch off instead of addressing the problem or a strained relationship with a manager, and that makes matters worse. So it's important not just for bad news, it's also important for things not to be left to fester and continue to be a point of contention. Having the right policies in place, I'm not going to say much about that, but it is really important to have ethics and fraud policies in place. Build a culture of transparent corporate governance. So if we just look at a little bit of this in a little bit more detail, why do we need policies and procedures? In a bad risk culture, people will do the things regardless of any risk policies and controls. This is the typical risk culture which we see in most organizations. In a good risk culture, people will do the right things even when policies and controls are not in place. Is any of you at this point in your organization where people will do the right things even when policies and controls are not in place? If you are, that is very good, but there are 2 more levels. In an effective risk culture, every person will do something about the risks associated with his or her job on a daily basis. And if we look at the ultimate risk culture, that is where every person is a risk manager and will evaluate and control and optimize the risks to build sustainable competitive advantage for the organization. You see that this broadly fits in with the 5 levels that I've discussed and shown you earlier that you can work on when you look at your organization. So at what level of maturity is your organization? And from the slides and the tool, you'll be able to establish that and build your action plan for implementing and building risk culture from that assessment. If we quickly look at competencies, I won't say too much about competencies, but it's important to look at building the risk competencies into the organization's competency framework. Now, many organizations do not have a competency framework. If you at least have job descriptions or role profiles, add the risk requirements into those job descriptions. Very often we see in organizations, they say, and any other duties assigned. Just above that, add in risk management. And then make sure that people understand risk management and understand how they have to look at risk management in their jobs. So I'm not going to say too much about the competency framework, just that it's very important that we do have to put these competencies into the organization's framework as far as risk management is concerned. Let the competency framework also drive your total employee value. Now, very often we miss this picture completely. Skills worth is the experience, the education, the competencies, and the character. Very often most human resource departments look at this. Most recruiters will look at this. The potential value covers things of the ability to apply those skills. What is the value you can add? Do you actually fit into the organization? Very often this part of a people risk assessment or a pre-employment assessment is missed out completely, and hardly ever is that potential value paid for. Very few organizations would pay you for what you are coming to do there. We often see that the focus is on this area, on skills, education, competencies, character, etc. So very often we also then see high potential employees will go somewhere else, and just your high performance employees will stay. Another very important aspect to look at when you build risk culture is communication. Generally in the live audience environment, I would ask what this is, and a few people might know what it is. The importance is that you should not let your communication break down. Communication must always be clear to the users. Communication must always you must also make sure that the message is understood. Generally, if two people talk to each other, there are 6 personalities at play. There are 3 personalities from the one side. The one is the real you, the perceived you, and the projected you. The real you is how you really are. The perceived you is how the person you are talking to sees you. And the projected you is the image that you really want to project that might not be the true you. And if the other person starts talking, another 3 personalities come into play. So you have 6 personalities around every conversation. And you need to look at how do you take this into consideration when you build risk culture. Here, most often, the message is no safety, smoking first. So don't let the communication break down. Make sure that it's clear and understood. Here there are 2 messages. No smoking, safety first is the true message. So most people are more comfortable with the old problems than with the new solutions. But we need to look at how can we build this risk culture, and how do we take risk management into the future in our organizations. You will have to go through the process of measuring the level of maturity, looking at the 5 pillars of the mitigation framework, how well you are doing on that. You cannot cut and paste this. It is something that you have to build that is organization specific. Very often you need to look at fixing up the existing corporate culture before you can build the risk culture on top of that. So a key element here to keep in mind would be to look at who you can involve in this process. Look at people who are not comfortable with the old problems, people who want to do the new solutions and who want to look at new solutions. Effective risk response is not just looking at the downside, it's also about seizing the opportunities. I said in the beginning that those who are not good at risk management will be exploited by those who are good at risk management, and that is a key element to keep in mind, that if you just sit back and do nothing, you will go out of business. Even if you're on the right track and you just sit there, the train will eventually run you over. The last thing I want to talk about is just on red, amber, green, which we find in most businesses. We find in most organizations that we look at risk management and we look at red, amber, green, and psychologically people think that green is good. If everything is green, then we are on our way. Generally, if everything is green, in the words of Mario Andretti, if everything is under control, you're not going fast enough. In my words, if everything is green, you are slowly going out of business. So the risk profile of any organization, and as such also your people risk profile, must steadily increase over time. As you get better at risk management, you must take more risk for more reward. If you're not getting better at risk management, don't try this because it doesn't work the other way around. You must get better at risk management for your risk profile to improve. Well, as your risk profile improves. So the key element is look at the risk appetite, build the risk culture, make sure everybody knows what the goals and objectives are, look at what level of maturity you are in the 6 different areas that we discussed, and then build your action plan. For example, if you are at level 1 in terms of policies, and you are at level 5 in terms of people and organizational design, obviously you need to decide if you want to bring policies up to level 5. You might not want to get to level 5 in each of those areas. You also need to look at the cost of controls and the cost of risk management that's associated with your action plan. So it's important to look at the cost of controls. Very often we find there are green risk profiles and everybody thinks that the green risk profile is great. But if we go and look at the cost of the controls to keep that risk profile green, they are way in excess. They are way too expensive. You can take a lot more risk for maybe giving up a few of those controls, and you will still be okay as long as you manage that risk properly and look at the controls that you keep. So it's important not to over-control. Generally, the best risk management you can have in any organization is to have a risk manager next to every employee. But that is certainly not cost-effective. So if we look at this and we ignore it all, we will go to a place that I call the corporate graveyard. Risk management can only stop when your company goes out of business. How long does it take to build a risk culture? For as long as your company exists. There are always things that you need to improve. There are always things that you must improve because the external environment changes at such a fast pace that you can't just say, oh, we have a risk culture, we are at this level, and think everything is good now. As the external environment changes, your risk profile changes. With any major systems implementation or any major new product launch, your risk profile changes. So it's of no use to have a risk profile and look at it once a year or once a quarter. The importance is to have risk reporting as live as possible, and the same goes for your risk culture. I don't know if we have a way of looking at questions. If there are any questions, and we cannot facilitate them now. You can send them through to me, and I'll try to look at that. I just see the note from Ali, so if there are any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Yes, folks. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Horst, for the very interesting presentation. Folks, we are open for the Q&A now, so if you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or you can post them in the question box. I'll be happy to read them over on their behalf. So there's one hand already raised, so let me try to go directly to the caller. We have Brother Abdullah Al-Fubaraj. Brother Abdullah, you raised your hand. I believe you have a question. Sir, could you introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, Simon, this is Abdullah Kubash from Saudi Arabia. Thank you for the presentation. I think somewhere in the presentation you mentioned that in order to build the risk culture in the organization, we can, link it with the performance. Can you give an example? How can I link how can I link building risk culture in my organization with the performance of the employees?
Yes, it's important to look at when we manage performance. It's important to look at putting the risk requirements in there. It would be very difficult if you don't have the risk requirements defined in the job description or as part of the job description. So the first step would be to make sure that the risk requirements are in the job description, and then to set indicators or parameters to measure those risks, those requirements in terms of the job. And then performance, there are a few things that you can look at. Control of losses would be one if it's an operational area that can have losses. Bringing losses down, having targets for losses. In one of the organizations I worked before, I had a number of different countries, and I put out a threshold for losses, and we measured each and every country. You can measure each and every part of the business or different businesses, depending on your situation. We measured them against the loss threshold, and we created a little league table. So some of them were at the bottom of the league table, and psychologically they don't want to be there. So you have an immediate focus on the performance, where in the past maybe there wasn't any attention paid to the losses. Now that there's a league table and it's transparent and everybody can see where everybody else is, it starts to become almost a competition, and there's automatically renewed focus on that. So that would be one way of driving it. What you can also do, I don't have it in this presentation, but something that I call a comparative dashboard. So you get different data streams. For example, you would take loss data and audit data and compare the two. So what I found at one point in time was those with the best audit findings had the highest losses. So you can immediately see when you look at the kind of comparative reporting where the issues are, and you manage performance accordingly. What we did is we put those league tables into the performance appraisal for the directors responsible for those areas. And it automatically improved because they wanted not to be at the bottom.
Okay.
Okay, Brother Abdullah, are you done with the question? Do you have any supplementary?
I'm okay unless somebody has another question.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, we have another question. So should I move to another caller then?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Brother Abdullah, for your question. Let me move to another question, which is posted in the question box by Mr. Shaker Al-Shahili. What is the first step after we know the culture maturity assessment, and what tool to use?
Okay, the first step is to build your action plan from your assessment. So for example, if you do the assessment, you might find that in one area you are at level 2, in another area you are at level 5, maybe in another area you are at level 3. So you then need to decide to either work on the lower levels first, and if you use the slides, you can see if you are at level 2, look at the requirements for level 3, and those would be the things that you would include in your action plan in that specific area to get to level 3. So the next step after the assessment is to look at your action plan, and you can derive that from the assessment. I've also developed, like you mentioned in the introduction, Ali, I've developed an online tool that can measure risk maturity. The beauty of that is it's still subjective, but it's a lot more accurate than just talking to people or doing a checklist or doing a rating yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. So there is a tool available, but the manual process, if I can call it that, part of what you will have from the slides, and if you want the spreadsheet, I can send it to you. That will help you to do it manually in your organization.
Thank you very much. That was, I believe the brother also posted, it was for level 3 it meant. We have another question from Brother Mahmoud Sharaf. The question is, as an organization leaders, what would be our role in being proactive in risk management?
It depends on what level, but if you're the organizational leader and you're meaning that you are on the executive committee, you're in the general management level, I think the important thing there would be to walk the talk, as we call it, to really show that you are not just supporting risk management, you are actually involved in risk management. A key suggestion I can make is that you actually discuss risk management. Say, for example, you are a member of the executive committee and you've listened to this and you want to promote building a risk culture. What I would suggest is at the next EXCO meeting, you challenge the other members of the committee to name the top 3 risks in their areas and just see how much they really know. You know, the ideal situation with risk culture is that every executive will actually come to the executive meeting and in the executive meeting report and talk about the risks associated with his or her area. We got very comfortable to make it risk department's job to actually produce a risk report. That's not really risk culture. Risk culture is if those executives actually know what's going on and they discuss those items in their meetings. So the ideal risk reporting in my mind is when all executives go to the EXCO meeting and they actually report on the risks and discuss the risks in their part of the business in that meeting. That's much better than a risk report prepared on historic data coming from the risk department. So I would say challenge other executives, start to say, what are you doing about risk management? Do you actually know what is your top 3 or your top 5 risks? And what are you doing about them? That would be a suggestion I can make.
We have one last question from Shaima Nasser. Hello, thanks for the great presentation. I would like to ask if risk management is not active in the organization and it is upon HR or quality professionals to introduce it, how can they introduce the concept and get the leadership to buy in?
That is a very interesting question. I think personally, I feel that risk management is there in each and every organization. If you were not doing risk management, you would be out of business. So it's maybe not in a formal process or a formal way. My suggestion would be we find that in the region and in the culture that we work in, very often the easiest way is to bring in an outsider, but that's not necessarily the case. I think it would start with educating the executives. Just pass on some information on risk management. I have a few articles, if you're interested, that I can share that you can show the executives. I also do a training program for executives, but the key thing would be to create awareness with the executives first. That would be the first step if you have no risk management. Or another approach would be to say we have risk management because we are in business, and if we were not managing the risks, we will not be in business anymore. So we are doing it, and very often you find organizations are actually doing a good job of it. There's just not the value add aspect. They can take it to the next level, have something more formal. It doesn't have to be a 100-man strong risk department. It could just be a bit of a more formal structure and a more open discussion around the risks. So basic risk skills, but creating the awareness first would be my suggestion.
We can take one last question. There's another one, interesting one, a short one from Brother Aziz Ahmed. What is the role of internal audit and risk management in the organization for implementing risk management culture?
That is a great question, and that is one of the biggest obstacles that I've seen in my career. Very often you find that risk management, audit department get interested, and very often you see that risk management is born out of the audit department. Now the problem with that is that risk management is then always seen as another level of policing or another level of audit. So if you create risk management from scratch, the best is to keep it an independent department like it should be. For banks, for example, with the Basel requirements, it's quite clear that risk management must be independent. I would say, just quickly on the roles, risk management must be independent from audit. Risk management must report directly to the board or the chairperson of the risk committee. That's the ideal situation for a chief risk officer to report, because we have seen large corporate scandals where executives were involved. So there's no use having a risk executive or a chief risk officer and making him report to the chief financial officer or the chief operating officer or even the CEO. They do have to have that independence like audit has. As far as working with audit, a lot of auditors are working on what we call risk-based audit. I have found organizations where they claim to have risk-based audit, but they don't have a risk department, and I don't see how that can be possible. So there's a situation where audit and risk will work together. The other thing is the risk processes must be audited by the internal and the external auditors. So if we really want good risk governance and a very good structure to build risk culture, driven from the top, direct reporting to the board or the board risk committee, if you have a board risk committee, not the board audit committee, they have a different focus. Audit and compliance keep the organization safe. Risk management moves the organization forward. But the processes must be audited. That is a requirement for banks, and that is just normal good governance and good practice as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horst Simon, for a very interesting presentation, because that really brings us towards the end of the time. And I would like to thank you on behalf of MILE for giving a very, very intriguing lecture and presentation. And thank you to all of those who participated in this webinar. There are a number of people who have been asking about the soft copy of the presentation. We will be uploading it on MILE Community. I've just broadcasted a link on the chat box. This is community.mile.org. You can click on the webinar tabs to access all the archives of our webinars which we have done in the past. We are recording this webinar and will be uploading it on MILE Community as well, so please stay tuned. With that note, once again, thank you all of those who participated in this webinar, and special thanks to Mr. Horst Simon for giving this presentation and for your time. Thank you very much. I'm going to end this webinar.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to end this webinar. You all